They wanted to hurt his mom. She was sick. The boy walked 20 miles through desert heat with blood on his face, and what the Apache did next made the whole county go silent. But this isn't just a story about a boy and a tribe. This is a story about a woman named Elena Carrillo, who drove onto that reservation with a court order in one hand and a lie in her heart, and who found something there she never expected, the man who would break every wall she'd built, and the truth that would save them both. If she survived long enough to speak it, promise, before this ends, a man will collapse mid-sentence trying to say 3 words, a woman will trade her career to save his life, and a villain will confess on camera to a crime that was never hers to answer for. "Stay!" Elena's sedan kicked dust across the cattle guard at the reservation boundary, and the first thing she noticed was the smell. Sage, not the grocery store kind, not dried bundles wrapped in twine at a gift shop. Wild sage crushed under tires, rising through the vents of her car, sharp and green and alive. It coated the back of her throat and made her eyes water, and she would remember it for the rest of her life as the smell of the moment everything changed. She had the window cracked 2 inches. Bureau policy said keep it closed. Bureau policy said a lot of things. Elena Carrillo, Child Protective Services investigator, 4 years on the job, spotless record, had followed every one of them until this morning, when she'd read the file on Daniel Redhawk and felt something in her chest go sideways. The boy was 12. His mother, Sandra Redhawk, had stage 3 lymphoma. The complaint alleged neglect, missed school days, inadequate supervision, unsanitary home conditions. The complainant was listed as anonymous, but Elena had been doing this long enough to read the handwriting on the intake form. She knew whose pen that was. She knew exactly who wanted this boy removed. She parked at the community center because the address on the file pointed there. The building was cinder block, painted turquoise at some point in the past decade, the color now faded to something between blue and bone. A basketball hoop with no net stood at the edge of a cracked court. 3 trucks sat in the lot, all older than her car. She stepped out, and the sage hit her full force. She steadied herself against the doorframe. A man was standing at the entrance, not leaning, not waiting casually, standing. Feet shoulder width, arms crossed, watching her approach with the kind of stillness that made the air feel heavy. He was tall, broad through the chest and shoulders, dark hair cut short at the sides and longer on top, jaw set like granite. His skin was brown and weathered from sun, and there was a scar along his left forearm, pale against the rest of him, running from wrist to elbow. He didn't move. "Elena Carrillo," she said, stopping 6 feet from him. She held up her badge. "Child Protective Services. I'm here regarding a case file on a minor." Daniel Redhawk. His eyes moved from the badge to her face. They were dark, nearly black, and they gave away nothing. The sage smell was stronger here, growing wild along the foundation of the building. "I know who you are," he said. His voice was low, quiet, the kind of quiet that wasn't soft. "I know why you're here, and you're not taking that boy." "I haven't said I'm taking anyone. You brought a court order." He nodded toward the folder under her arm. She didn't look down. "It's a preliminary assessment authorization. Standard procedure." "Standard," he repeated, and the word sounded different in his mouth, stripped of its bureaucratic comfort. "And you are?" "Asa Whitehawk. I run the youth program here. Daniel's been in my care 3 afternoons a week for 2 years. Before that, he was in my Uncle Manny's. Before that, his mother brought him here when he could barely walk." He paused. "This community raised that boy. Whatever that file says, it was written by someone who's never set foot on this land." Elena held his gaze. She wanted to say she agreed. She wanted to say the file smelled wrong, that the complaint was too specific in some places and too vague in others, that the handwriting belonged to Gerald Torrance, district supervisor, a man whose interest in reservation cases had tripled since the tribal council rejected a land easement for a development company he had financial ties to. She wanted to say all of that. But she was standing on the other side of a line, and crossing it would end her career before she could use it to protect anyone. "I need to see the boy," she said, "and his mother, and the home. That's the process. If everything checks out, I file my report and this goes away. And if your boss decides it doesn't check out, then I'll fight him on it." He studied her. The sage caught a gust of wind and the smell sharpened between them. "You'll fight your own office, if the evidence supports it." "Yes, evidence," Asa said, and again the word changed shape when he spoke it. She didn't flinch. "I'm not your enemy, Mr. Whitehawk." Something shifted in his expression. Not softness. Recognition. He uncrossed his arms. "Come inside," he said. He turned and walked through the door without checking to see if she followed. Elena noted that. He didn't perform authority, he simply had it. She tucked that observation away and stepped through the door into the gym. Sage followed her in. The gym was warm and smelled of rubber mats and old wood. A group of 7 kids, ages maybe 10 to 15, were running passing drills on the court. An older man sat on a folding chair near the bleachers, watching. His hair was silver, braided, and he held a water bottle in one hand like he'd forgotten it was there. He looked up when Elena entered, and his gaze went through her the way Asa's had, not hostile but thorough. "Manny," Asa said. "This is the CPS investigator." The old man said nothing for a long moment. Then, "Daniel's not here today. He's with his mother. She had treatment this morning." "Which facility?" Elena asked. "IHS clinic, 40 miles east. His aunt drove them. They'll be back tonight." Elena wrote this down. Standard procedure. The pen felt wrong in her hand. "I can come back tomorrow," she said. "You could," Manny said. "Or you could sit down and understand what you're walking into before you walk into it." Elena looked at Asa. He pulled a folding chair from the wall and set it 3 feet from Manny's. He didn't set it closer. He didn't gesture for her to sit. He gave her the space and the choice. She sat. Manny talked for 40 minutes. He told her about Sandra Redhawk, who'd been diagnosed 18 months ago and had fought through every round of treatment without missing a single school function, a single community meal, a single ceremony. He told her about Daniel, who'd been walking 3 miles each way to school since he was 8 because the bus route had been cut. He told her about the morning 2 weeks ago when 3 men had come to Sandra's house to deliver a document, and Daniel, alone because his mother was at chemo, had answered the door with blood on his face from a nosebleed he'd had in his sleep, and one of those men had taken a photograph and submitted it as evidence of domestic disturbance. 3 men, Elena said. "From where?" "County office. One of them wore a tie. The other 2 were from the development company that wants the easement through our eastern section." Elena's pen stopped moving. "I can give you the name of the man in the tie," Manny said. "Gerald Torrance," Elena said. Manny looked at Asa. Asa looked at Elena. The sage was in her clothes now, she realized. It was on her skin. "You already know," Manny said. "I suspect. I can't prove it yet." She closed her notebook. "But I can write an honest report, and I can make sure this file doesn't go where he wants it to go." She stood. Asa stood with her, and for the first time she noticed how close the folding chairs had put them. His shoulder was 8 inches from hers. She could see the individual threads of the scar on his forearm, and she realized it wasn't a single cut. It was a pattern, something deliberate, something old. "I'll come back tomorrow," she said, "to see Daniel and Sandra." "I'll drive you to the house," Asa said. "Roads out there aren't marked. I have GPS. GPS doesn't know which bridges are out." She almost argued. She didn't. 7 a.m., she said. 6, he counted. "Sandra wakes early. She'll want to be ready for you. Let her have that dignity." Elena felt something crack inside her chest. It was small, hairline, the kind of fracture you don't notice until you try to carry weight. 6, she agreed. She drove back through the sage at sunset with the window down. The smell was in her hair. She didn't wash it out that night. She sat on the motel bed with the file open and read every line of Gerald Torrance's complaint, and she marked every inconsistency with a red pen until the pages looked like they were bleeding. At 5:45 the next morning, she pulled into the community center lot. Asa was already there, standing beside a truck that was older than both of them. He had 2 cups of coffee in a cardboard carrier. You drink it black? He asked. Yes. He handed her the cup without touching her fingers. She noticed that too. They drove for 20 minutes on dirt roads, and he was right. The GPS would have failed. 2 washes had flooded overnight, and he knew the alternate routes without hesitation. The sage grew thicker out here, waist-high in some places, and the morning sun turned it silver green. How long have you run the youth program? She asked. 6 years. Since I came back. From where? Marines. 2 deployments. Then I came home and found 3 kids from this community in foster care in Tucson. 2 of them came back with damage that didn't exist when they left. One of them didn't come back at all. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. So I started the program. What happened to the one who didn't come back? She died. 17 years old. Foster home in Mesa. Official cause was accidental overdose. He paused. She'd never touched a substance before she was placed there. Elena looked out the window. The sage blurred past. Her throat burned. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be sorry. Be accurate. They arrived at Sandra's house. It was small, clean, with a garden in the front that had been recently watered. A wind chime made of shell and bone hung from the porch overhang. Inside, Sandra Redhawk sat at the kitchen table in a flannel robe, thin but composed, her hair wrapped in a cotton scarf. Daniel sat beside her, doing homework. He looked up when they entered, and Elena saw a boy who was tired and serious and not afraid. Asa stood by the door. He didn't enter the kitchen. He waited for Sandra to wave him in. Sit, Sandra said to Elena. I made coffee, but Asa probably already got you some. He did. He does that. Sandra looked at her son. Daniel, say hello. Hello, Daniel said. He didn't look away from his homework. Then he looked up. Are you going to take me away from my mom? The question landed in the center of Elena's chest. No, she said, and she meant it as a personal promise, which was a violation of every protocol she'd been trained on, and she meant it anyway. She conducted the assessment. The home was clean. The refrigerator was stocked. Daniel's school records, which Sandra had prepared in a neat folder, showed attendance at 91% with all absences documented as medical accompaniment. His grades were BS and 1A in history. Sandra's treatment schedule was pinned to the refrigerator with magnets shaped like hummingbirds. There was nothing here. There was nothing in this home that justified the complaint, and Elena felt the fracture in her chest widen because she knew what Gerald Torrance would do with her report if it came back clean. He would bury it. He would file a new complaint under a different name. He would send someone else, someone who wouldn't sit in this kitchen and see what Elena saw, a woman fighting for her life, and a boy carrying weight no 12-year-old should carry, and a community that had already closed ranks around them both. She looked at Asa. He was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her read Sandra's medical files. The scar on his forearm caught the kitchen light. She realized she'd been looking at it more than she should. I need to document everything, Elena said to Sandra. Photos of the home, copies of Daniel's records, your treatment plan. All of it goes into my report, and my report goes to the court. Not to Torrance. He's your boss, Sandra said. He's my supervisor. The court is my boss. And the court will see a compliant home with a loving parent and a supported child. That's what I'm going to write because that's what's true. Sandra's eyes filled. She pressed her lips together and nodded once, hard. Daniel looked at Elena. Thank you, he said. Then he looked at Asa. Told you she was different. Osa's expression didn't change. But something behind his eyes moved, and Elena felt it across the room. She spent 3 hours documenting. She photographed every room. She interviewed Daniel alone, then Sandra alone. She called the school and spoke with 2 teachers in the attendance office. She called the IHS clinic and confirmed Sandra's treatment schedule. She built a case file so thorough that no reasonable judge would grant removal. When she was finished, she stepped onto the porch. The sage was everywhere, the smell thick in the late morning heat. Asa followed her out. You're good at this, he said. I'm doing my job. No. You're doing more than your job, and you know it, and it's going to cost you. She turned to face him. He was standing close, closer than he'd been before, and she could smell him under the sage, clean sweat and coffee and something warm she couldn't name. "I know what it's going to cost me," she said. "Do you have someone backing you? At your office?" "No." "Then let me ask you something." He took a step back, deliberately, giving her room. "Will you come back?" "Not as an investigator, as a witness. If this goes to hearing, I want you on our side of the table. That would end my career with CPS." "I know." She looked at the sage. She thought about the girl who died in Mesa, 17 years old. "I'll come back," she said. He nodded. He didn't touch her. He didn't reach for her hand or her arm or any of the gestures that men used when they wanted to seal an agreement with contact. He simply met her eyes and let the agreement stand on words alone. She noticed. She stored it alongside every other thing she'd noticed about him, in a place inside her that was filling up faster than she wanted to admit. Elena drove back to her motel and filed the report. She marked it clean. She flagged the complaint as potentially fraudulent and cited the documentation inconsistencies she'd identified. She submitted it directly to the family court judge and copied the tribal council. She did not copy Gerald Torrance. He called her within 2 hours. "Elena, what did you do?" "My job, Gerald. You submitted that report without my review. That's a procedural violation. Emergency filings go directly to the court when there's reason to believe supervisory interference may compromise the integrity of the assessment." Section 14(7). I documented my reasons. Silence. "Then, you're accusing me. I'm following procedure. If you have concerns, take them to compliance." He hung up. Elena sat on the motel bed and her hands shook for 5 minutes. Then she drove back to the reservation. Asa was in the gym. The kids were gone. He was alone, hitting a heavy bag in the corner, and she watched him from the doorway for 10 seconds before he noticed her. His shirt was soaked through. The scar moved on his forearm with every strike. "He called," she said. Asa stopped the bag with both hands. "And?" I cited procedure. "He can't override the filing. But he's going to come after me, and he's going to come after this case from another angle. He has contacts at the state level." Asa unwrapped his hands, slowly, each finger deliberate. "What do you need?" he asked. "Proof that he's connected to the development company. Financial records, emails, anything that ties the complaint to the easement dispute. Manny has a file. He's been building it for 2 years. Can I see it tonight?" "You can see it now." He pulled a clean shirt from a bag on the bleachers. He turned his back to change, and Elena saw the muscles shift across his shoulders, and she looked away, and then she looked back, and he caught her looking when he turned around. Neither of them said anything about it, but the air between them changed temperature. They sat in Manny's kitchen with the file spread across the table. Manny had done meticulous work. Land surveys, meeting minutes from the tribal council, a letter from the development company naming Gerald Torrance as a community liaison with a consulting fee of $12,000 a year. 3 other CPS complaints against reservation families, all filed within 6 months of the easement rejection, all by anonymous complainants, all in the same handwriting. "This is a pattern," Elena said. "He's using child removal as leverage. Take enough kids, destabilize enough families, and the council might reconsider the easement to make it stop. Will the court see it that way?" Manny asked. "If I present it correctly. If I'm still employed when the hearing happens." Asa was sitting across from her. The kitchen was small. His knee was 4 inches from hers under the table. She was aware of every one of those inches. "You can stay here," he said. "On the reservation. If they fire you, you'll need a base. We have a guest room at the center. I can't accept housing from a party in an active case. You can if you're no longer the investigator. If they fire you, you're a civilian witness." She looked at him. "You've thought this through." "I've been thinking about it since you said, 'I'll fight him on it,' with a straight face, and meant it." Her heart beat once, hard against her ribs. The sage was on both of them now, in the kitchen, in the air, as if the land itself was weaving them into the same cloth. I haven't been fired yet, she said. Yet, Asa repeated. And something in the word was not about her job. They worked until midnight. Manny fell asleep in his chair around 11, and Asa draped a blanket over him without breaking stride in the conversation. Elena watched him do it and felt the fracture in her chest shift from damage to doorway. At midnight, he walked her to her car. The desert was cold and the sage had gone quiet in the still air, but the smell was there, constant underneath everything. Elena, he said. It was the first time he'd used her first name. He said it carefully, as if he'd been practicing and wanted to get it right. Yes, I need you to know something. When this is over, whatever happens with the case, I'm going to ask you to stay. Not because of the case, because of you. I want you to know that now so you can decide what to do with it. She stood by her car door. The cold bit through her jacket. His breath was visible in the air. That's not appropriate, she said. I know. I'm an investigator on your case. I know that too. And you're telling me anyway. Because I don't say things I don't mean, and I don't say them late. He took one step back. That same deliberate yielding. You don't have to answer. You don't have to do anything. I just wanted you to know where I stand. Elena got in her car. She closed the door. She drove 4 miles before she pulled over and pressed her forehead against the steering wheel, because her hands were shaking again, and this time it wasn't from fear. She went back the next day, and the day after. The case required it, she told herself. The documentation needed to be airtight. She needed to interview more community members. She needed to observe Daniel in his environment. She needed to see Asa Whitehawk standing in the gym doorway with the morning light behind him and the scar on his arm catching the sun. On the 4th day, Gerald Torrance filed a formal complaint against her. Insubordination, procedural violation, conflict of interest. She received the notice by email at 6 a.m. and drove to the reservation at 6:15. Asa was already at Sandra's house, fixing a broken step on the porch. Daniel was handing him nails. They're coming for me, Elena said. She held up her phone with the email on the screen. Asa set down the hammer. He read the email. He read it again. Daniel, he said, go inside and help your mom with breakfast. Daniel looked between them. He was 12, but he understood the frequency of that sentence. He went inside. Asa faced Elena. How long do you have? The hearing's in 10 days. If they suspend me before then, I can't testify at Daniel's custody review. Then we move the custody review up. We can't. Only the petitioner or the court can reschedule. Then we make the court want to reschedule. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Manny found this last night. Gerald's consulting contract with Redstone Development. It has a performance clause. He gets a bonus for every parcel of tribal land that changes zoning status. 12,000 base, plus 5,000 per successful reclassification. Elena took the paper. Her hands were steady now. She read it twice. This is a financial conflict of interest. He can't supervise cases involving parties who are subjects of his paid consulting work. Can you get this to the judge? I can get this to the judge today. She looked at him. He was standing close again, and she realized it had happened gradually over 4 days, the distance between them narrowing in increments so small she could pretend she hadn't noticed. She noticed. Asa. Yeah. Thank you. He reached out and touched the back of her hand. One finger, light, the way you'd touch something you weren't sure you were allowed to hold. His skin was warm and rough, and the sage was in it. Is this okay? He asked. Yes, she said. He withdrew his hand. He picked up the hammer. He went back to fixing the step, and Elena stood on Sandra Redhawk's porch with the contract in one hand and the ghost of his touch on the other, and knew with absolute certainty that she was not going to be the same person when this was over. She filed the conflict of interest motion that afternoon. The judge reviewed it within hours and issued an order for Gerald Torrance to recuse himself from all cases involving the reservation. A temporary supervisor was assigned. The custody hearing was accelerated to 5 days out. Elena should have gone back to the motel. She should have prepared her testimony, organized her evidence, slept. Instead, she drove to the reservation at dusk and found Asa alone in the community center gym, and the sage was coming through the open windows and the light was amber and low. He was sitting on the bleachers. He looked tired, not the tired of physical effort, but the deeper kind, the tired of carrying things for years without setting them down. The judge accepted the motion, she said. I heard. Torrance is off the case. I heard that too. She sat beside him. Not 3 feet apart, not 18 inches. She sat close enough that their arms touched, and neither of them moved away. When you said you were going to ask me to stay, she said. Did you mean here? On the reservation? I meant wherever you are. I'll go there if you'd rather. You'd leave your community. I'd leave anything for the right reason. But I don't think I'd have to, because I think you'd stay. She turned to look at him. His face was close and his eyes were dark and the scar on his arm was inches from her fingers. I'm still technically an investigator on your case. Case is almost over. Almost isn't over. I know. He raised his hand, slow, and held it in the air between them, palm up. An offering, not a claim. I told you I wouldn't say things late. That means I also won't do anything you don't want. You tell me where the line is and I'll stand behind it. Elena looked at his open hand. The calluses, the scar disappearing under his sleeve, the sage on his skin. She put her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, gentle, firm. His thumb moved once across her knuckles, and the touch went through her like current. The line, she said, is moving. I noticed, he said. They sat like that until the gym went dark. His hand was warm and steady, and he didn't pull her closer and he didn't let go. On the 5th day, Elena stopped pretending the line existed. She came to the center after dark. She told herself it was to review Manny's files one more time. The lights were off in the main building, but the small office at the back had a lamp burning. She knocked. Asa opened the door. He was in a white t-shirt and jeans, barefoot, and his hair was damp from a shower. The room smelled of sage and soap. I have more questions about the timeline, she said. No, you don't. She stood in the doorway. Her chest was heaving and she hated herself for it, and she couldn't stop. No, she admitted. I don't. He stepped back from the door, giving her the threshold, letting her choose to cross it or stay where she was. His feet were bare on the concrete floor, and the vulnerability of that small detail cracked something inside her wide open. She stepped inside. She closed the door behind her. I need you to know, she said, and her voice was shaking, that I have wanted to do this since the first day, and I have been fighting it because it's wrong and it could compromise everything, and I don't care anymore because I think the wanting is going to kill me faster than the consequences. Asa didn't move. He stood in the center of the small room, the lamp throwing gold across half his face, and he waited. What do you want? He asked. Quiet. No assumption. You. Tonight. Whatever you'll give me. I'll give you everything you ask for. Nothing you don't. He took one step toward her, close enough to touch, not touching. You start. You stop. You lead. I follow. That's how this works, because I will not be another man who took from you without asking. Elena put her hands on his chest. She felt his heart through the cotton. It was hammering, and the knowledge that he was as wrecked as she was made her brave. She fisted the front of his shirt and pulled him down. The kiss was not tentative. It was 4 days of restraint collapsing into contact, and his mouth was hot and tasted of coffee and sage, and his hands went to her waist only after she pressed into him, and even then he held her loosely, fingers spread, giving her room to pull back. She didn't pull back. She pushed forward, walking him backward until his shoulders hit the wall, and the impact made him grunt against her mouth, and the sound went through her belly like a lit match. Tell me what's okay. He breathed against her lips. Everything, she said. I'll tell you if it's not. She pulled his shirt up and he helped her, raising his arms, and when the cotton cleared his head, she put her mouth on his collarbone and tasted sage and salt. His skin was hot. The scar on his arm was rough under her palm when she ran her hand down it, and she felt the pattern of it, the deliberate lines, and she kissed each one without asking what they meant because that was a conversation for later, and this was not the time for conversation. His hands went to her shirt buttons. He undid the first one and stopped. "Still okay? Keep going." He undid them one at a time, slow enough that she could stop him at any point, and by the time the shirt fell open she was trembling. He pushed the fabric off her shoulders and let it drop and put his hands on her bare waist, and his palms were rough and warm, and the contrast of his calluses against her skin made her gasp. He bent and kissed her throat. She tilted her head back and he moved down, his mouth tracing her neck to her collarbone, to the space between her breasts, and each kiss was preceded by a pause, a breath against her skin, waiting for the shiver of assent before continuing. "Is this you following?" she whispered. "This is me following," he murmured against her sternum. "You want me to lead?" "Not yet." She unhooked her own bra and dropped it. His eyes went dark and his breath caught, and she watched him look at her with a hunger he was visibly restraining, his hands still at her waist, not moving up until she put her hands over his and slid them upward. "Now," she said. His hands moved over her breasts and his thumbs passed over her nipples, and she arched into his touch and made a sound she didn't recognize. He pulled her against him, skin to skin, and the heat of his chest against hers was an annihilation she hadn't prepared for. She kissed him again, deeper, her fingers in his hair, and she felt his arousal against her hip and pressed into it deliberately, and his groan was low and strained. She reached for his belt. He caught her wrist. Not hard. A question. "You sure?" "I've never been sure of anything this fast in my life." He let go of her wrist. She unfastened his belt, unbuttoned his jeans, pushed them down. He kicked them off. She ran her hands over his hips, the flat plane of his stomach, lower. And when she touched him, he braced one hand against the wall and dropped his head and breathed her name. "Elena." "I'm here." He lifted her. She wrapped her legs around him and he carried her to the narrow cot in the corner of the office, and she wanted to laugh because the cot was ridiculous. Military surplus, barely wide enough for one person, but he laid her down on it and settled over her, and the weight of him was perfect and careful, and she stopped thinking about the cot. He removed the rest of her clothes with the same deliberate patience, each layer followed by a pause, each pause an invitation to stop. She removed his. They were skin to skin in the lamplight, and the sage was on both of them, and his mouth moved down her body with a thoroughness that took her breath. He kissed her stomach. He kissed her hip bone. He looked up at her. "Still following?" he said. "Please don't stop following." He didn't stop. His mouth found her center, and she gasped and her back arched off the cot, and his hands held her hips steady with a gentleness that contradicted the intensity of what he was doing, and she came apart with his name on her lips. Her fingers twisted in the thin military blanket, the sage smell surrounding them both. He rose over her. His forehead rested against hers. He was trembling. "I need," he started. "Yes." He entered her slowly, watching her face, and she watched his, and they breathed together in the small room with the lamp making gold out of the dark. And when he moved, she met him, and when she moved, he answered, and the rhythm they found was not urgent. It was deliberate, intentional, each stroke a sentence in a language they were building between them. She climaxed again with her face against his neck, and he followed, and his body shuddered against hers, and he said her name one more time, and it sounded like a prayer said by a man who'd forgotten how. They lay on the narrow cot in the aftermath. His arm was under her head, and the scar was against her cheek, and she traced the pattern of it with her fingertip. "What are these?" she asked. "Later," he said. "I'll tell you later." He kissed her forehead. He held her for 20 minutes. Then he got up and dressed quietly, and when she started to rise, he put his hand on her shoulder. "Sleep," he said. "I'll be in the gym. Doors locked. You're safe." "You're leaving?" "I'm giving you space to decide how you feel about this without me in the room influencing it." She stared at him. "You think I'm going to regret this?" "I think you deserve the room to find out. That's not the same thing. He left. She lay on the narrow cot in the sage-soaked dark, and she did not regret it. She regretted nothing. She fell asleep with his warmth still on her skin. In the morning, she was mortified. Not by the sex, by the urgency of wanting to see him again. The almost physical pull toward the gym, the way she dressed and brushed her hair with shaking hands in the office bathroom as if she was 16 and not a 32-year-old investigator who had just compromised her professional ethics in the most thorough way possible. She found him in the gym. He was setting up cones for drills. He looked up and his expression went careful, protective, braced for her to say it had been a mistake. "Hi," she said. Brilliant, devastating. A career in verbal precision, and she produced hi. "Hi," he said. "I don't regret it." He set down the last cone. "Neither do I. But I'm awkward about it, and I don't know what to do with my hands." His mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but the architecture of one. "I don't either." "Good. Then we're both useless." "That's equitable." He did smile then, one of the 4 times she would see it fully, and it transformed his face from granite to something alive and warm and dangerous in an entirely different way. Manny appeared from the back hallway with coffee. He looked at Elena. He looked at Asa. He looked at the space between them, which was approximately 0. "About time," Manny said. "Manny," Asa warned. I didn't say anything. The old man sat down on the bleachers. "But if I were going to say something, I would say this. That boy has not slept a full night in 3 years. Not since he came back from overseas. If you want to be useful to him, exhaust him." He sipped his coffee with the serenity of a man who had said exactly what he intended to say. Elena's face went hot. Asa's face went wooden. Manny watched them both with visible satisfaction. "I'm going to go check on Daniel," Asa said, and left the gym with the posture of a man fleeing an artillery barrage. Elena sat down next to Manny. "He doesn't sleep?" she asked. "Nightmares. Since his first deployment. He won't talk about it, won't take medication, won't see anyone at the VA. Stubborn as his father." Manny paused. "But he slept last night. I checked on him this morning and he was out cold on the gym floor with a blanket and a look on his face I haven't seen in years." Elena processed this. Then she processed what Manny had actually advised her to do. "You're telling me to—" "I'm telling you he's a man who has been at war, inside and outside, for a decade. And you're the first thing that's made him put his weapons down. So yes, another sip of coffee. Exhaust him." Elena thought about this all day. She thought about it while interviewing Sandra's oncologist by phone. She thought about it while compiling the evidence package for the hearing. She thought about it while watching Asa run drills with the kids in the afternoon, his body precise and powerful and tireless. And she thought about what it would take to make that body still. That night, she went to his room at the center. He was reading by lamplight, sitting on the cot, the same cot, and when she walked in, he put down his book and started to stand. "Don't get up," she said. She crossed the room. She knelt on the cot, straddling his lap, and his book fell to the floor, and his hands went to her thighs by instinct and then froze. "Elena, do you want me here?" "Yes." "Then stop talking." She kissed him. She set the pace. She undressed him and undressed herself, and she was deliberate and thorough, and she paid attention to every sound he made, because each one told her what he needed. And what he needed was to not be in charge, to not carry the weight, to let someone else hold the structure while he existed inside it. She took her time. She moved slowly when he wanted fast, and she held him down when he tried to roll her over, and she whispered against his ear that she had him, that he could let go, that he was safe. And when he finally broke, it was with a sound that came from somewhere deep in his chest, somewhere he'd sealed shut, and she held him through it and felt his body give up its tension in stages, muscle by muscle, until he was boneless and breathing against her neck. He fell asleep holding her, his arm around her waist, his face in her hair, the scar resting against her hip. He didn't move all night. No nightmares, no thrashing, no waking at 3 a.m. to patrol the perimeter of his own mind. He slept like a man who had been given permission to rest for the first time in years. In the morning, he woke first. She felt him wake, felt the change in his breathing, the slight tension in his arm as awareness returned. She waited to see what he would do. He pressed his lips to her shoulder. Light. Almost imperceptible. "Can I hold you like this for a while?" he murmured. "You're already holding me like this." "I'm asking if you want me to be." "Yes, Asa, I want you to be." He pulled her closer. They lay in the narrow cot with the morning light coming through the high window and the sage coming through the screen, and for 10 minutes neither of them moved or spoke. Then he kissed her shoulder again and said, "Whatever you need today, I'm here for it, whatever you want me to be." And she heard what he was really saying, that he would not assume last night entitled him to today, that each day started fresh, that her consent was not a standing order. She turned in his arms and kissed him. "I need you to be exactly what you are." Over the next 3 nights, she noticed something wrong. She'd been sleeping beside him consistently now, and the pattern was clear. During the day, Asa was tireless, running drills, fixing things at Sandra's house, driving supplies back and forth, coordinating with the tribal council's lawyer. But each evening, he sat down a little harder. Each night, his skin was a little warmer against hers. The 3rd night, she woke to find his side of the cot soaked with sweat, and when she put her hand on his forehead, he was burning. The sage smell on his skin had changed. It was sharper, acrid, like something overheating. "Asa." He opened his eyes. They were glassy. "I'm fine." "You're running a fever. It'll pass. It always does. Always." "How often does this happen?" He closed his eyes. "Few times a year, since I came back. Doctors can't find anything. Va says it's psychosomatic." She sat up. She put both hands on his face. He was burning. "This doesn't feel psychosomatic. It never does." She got him water. She got cold cloths. She sat with him through the fever as it climbed and broke and climbed again, and at 4 a.m., she called the IHS clinic and described his symptoms, and the doctor on call said it sounded like it could be related to burn pit exposure, that several veterans from the region had reported similar cyclical fevers, that there was a new VA study, and had he enrolled? He hadn't enrolled. Of course he hadn't. He'd been too busy carrying everyone else. By dawn, the fever broke. He lay on the cot, wrung out, and she sat beside him with her hand in his hair. "You need to see a specialist," she said. "After the hearing. Before the hearing. The hearing is in 2 days. Daniel needs you alive. Sandra needs you alive. This community needs you alive. I need you alive." Her voice cracked on the last sentence, and she didn't try to fix it. He looked at her. His eyes were clear again, but exhausted. "There's something I haven't told you," he said. She waited. He sat up slowly. He held out his arm, the one with the scar. "These aren't ceremonial. They're not traditional. I did them to myself, after my 2nd deployment, after Maya died." Maya? The girl in Mesa. She was my cousin's daughter. I promised I'd keep her safe. I placed her in the system because I thought it would be better than the situation she was in. I signed the paperwork. I gave her to them. And they killed her. Elena's vision blurred. She blinked until it cleared. "You didn't kill her, Asa. I placed her there. I trusted a system I should have known was broken. And after, I came home, and I cut these lines because I needed to feel something besides guilt, and then I started the program so no one else would make the mistake I made." He paused. He looked at her. "When you walked onto this reservation with that court order, I saw another bureaucrat coming to take another child. That's what I saw. And then you opened your mouth and said, 'I'll fight him on it.' And I saw something I hadn't seen in 6 years. What? Someone inside the system who was worth trusting." She took his scarred arm and held it. She pressed her lips to the raised lines. He shuddered. "I need to tell you something too," she said. "About why I know Gerald's handwriting. About why I took this case." She told him. 3 years ago, she'd been assigned to a case in a neighboring county. a grandmother raising 2 grandchildren on tribal land. The complaint was identical to Daniel's anonymous suspicious timing, connected to a land dispute. Elena had done the assessment, found nothing wrong, filed a clean report. Gerald had overridden it. He'd reassigned the case to another investigator who rubber-stamped the removal. The children were placed in foster care 200 miles from their grandmother. One of them developed severe anxiety. The other stopped speaking entirely. Elena had filed a complaint. It was dismissed. She'd appealed. The appeal was buried. She'd considered going public, but she had no proof of Gerald's financial ties, no evidence of the pattern. She'd been carrying that failure for 3 years, and when Daniel Redhawk's file landed on her desk with the same handwriting on the complaint form, she'd recognized it instantly and knew this was her chance to finish what she'd started. "That's why I came alone," she said. "That's why I submitted directly to the court. That's why I've been building the evidence package with Manny, because I've seen what happens when Gerald wins, and I will not let it happen again." Asa was quiet for a long time. "You've been fighting this for 3 years. Yes. Alone. Yes." He pulled her against him. He held her head against his chest and he breathed into her hair, and the sage was between them, sharp and alive. "Not alone anymore," he said. They talked until the sun was fully up. About the case. About Maya. About the 2 children Elena hadn't been able to save. About the system and its fractures and the people who fell through them. About what it cost to stay inside a broken machine and try to fix it from within. About what it cost to stand outside and watch it grind. Hours. They talked for hours. And for the first time, Elena felt the weight she'd been carrying distribute across 2 sets of shoulders instead of 1. The hearing was in 2 days. Elena spent the next day preparing with the tribal council's lawyer, a woman named Ruth Begay, who had the demeanor of a canyon wall and the legal acumen to match. They built their case: Gerald's financial conflict, the pattern of complaints, the fraudulent documentation, Sandra's medical records and Daniel's school records, and the 27 character witnesses who had signed statements. On the morning of the hearing, Elena dressed in the motel bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror. She was about to destroy her career. She was about to testify against her own supervisor in open court with documentation that proved institutional corruption. If she did this, no CPS office in the state would hire her. She would be radioactive. She drove to the reservation. Asa was waiting by his truck. He was wearing a clean white shirt, his hair combed, his jaw clean-shaven. He looked like a man going to war in civilian clothes. "Whatever happens today," he said, "I need to say something to you first." She looked at him. The morning sage was thick, the smell almost overwhelming, as if the land was trying to speak through it. His eyes rolled back. His knees buckled. He went down hard, his shoulder hitting the truck on the way, and Elena screamed his name and caught his head before it hit the gravel, and he was burning, his skin so hot she could feel it through his shirt, and the sage smell on him was wrong, sharp and chemical, and she shouted for help. Manny came running. Daniel came running. Sandra came out on the porch in her robe, gripping the railing. "He's seizing," Elena said. His body was rigid, locked, and his breath was coming in stutters. "Call the clinic. Now." Manny was already on the phone. Daniel stood frozen, looking at Asa on the ground, and Elena saw the boy's face and recognized the expression. It was the face of a child watching someone he loved dying. The face of helplessness so total it becomes a kind of paralysis. "Daniel," she said, sharp enough to cut through his fear. "Get me water and every cold cloth in that house." Now. He ran. Having a task saved him. Elena cradled Asa's head in her lap and talked to him, her voice steady even though her hands were shaking, and she said his name over and over and pressed cold cloths against his neck and his wrists when Daniel brought them. The fever was the worst she'd seen. His body was consuming itself, and she remembered the IHS doctor's words about burn pit exposure, the cyclical fevers, the new VA study. Manny, the VA study, the burn pit registry. Has he enrolled? No. He won't go near the VA. Call them anyway. Tell them his symptoms. Tell them it's an emergency. Manny called. He argued. he demanded. He did what old warriors do when the bureaucracy stands between them and their people. He refused to hang up. Within 20 minutes, a VA doctor was on the phone, talking Elena through emergency protocols for suspected toxic exposure fever events. The fever broke 40 minutes later. Asa opened his eyes and looked at Elena, and his face was gray and bewildered. "The hearing," he said. "The hearing can wait. It can't wait. Daniel." "I'm here," Daniel said. He was kneeling next to them in the gravel, holding a water bottle, and his face was wet. "I'm right here, Asa." Asa reached out and put his hand on the boy's head. His arms shook with the effort. "You're going to be fine," Asa said to Daniel, and Elena saw him do what he always did, set his own body aside to carry someone else's fear. "No," she said. Both of them looked at her. "You're going to be fine too, Asa, because I'm going to make sure of it. You enrolled in that study. Manny did it while you were unconscious. You're getting treatment. I didn't agree to." "I didn't ask." He stared at her. Then something in his expression broke open, and she saw behind it a man who had not let anyone fight for him in so long that he'd forgotten it was possible. "Okay," he said. "Okay." Elena stood up. She had gravel embedded in her knees and Asa's sweat on her clothes, and the hearing was in 90 minutes. "Ruth Begay can present the case," she said. "She has everything. I'll testify by phone if I have to." "No," Asa said. He sat up slowly, bracing against the truck. "You go. You testify. In person. That's what this has been for. You stand in that room and you say what's true, and you finish what you started 3 years ago. I'm not leaving you. You're not leaving me. You're going to fight. That's different." She looked at him on the ground, sick, gray, trembling. Telling her to go fight, she knelt. She kissed him, hard, in front of Manny and Daniel and Sandra on the porch. "I love you," she said. "I'm saying it now because you couldn't and someone needs to, and I'm tired of things going unsaid." He put his hand on her face. His palm was still too warm. "I know," he said. "Come back and let me say it properly." She drove to the courthouse. She drove fast. The sage thinned as she left the reservation, but it was on her skin, in her hair, in her lungs. She arrived 12 minutes before the hearing. Ruth Begay was already there, files arranged, expression immovable. Gerald Torrance was on the other side of the courtroom, and when Elena walked in, his face went white. "You can't be here," he said. "You've been removed from this case." "I've been removed as lead investigator," Elena said. "I'm here as a witness." She sat in the witness chair and told the truth. All of it. The pattern of complaints, the identical handwriting, the consulting contract with Redstone Development, the performance bonus clause, the 2 children from the previous case who had been removed without cause and damaged in foster care. She named names, she cited dates, she presented documents. Gerald's attorney objected 7 times. The judge overruled 6 of them. Then Ruth Begay called her second witness, Manny Whitehawk, by phone from the reservation, because he was sitting with Asa. Manny spoke for 30 minutes. He described the 3 men who had come to Sandra's door. He identified Gerald among them. He described the photograph taken of Daniel's nosebleed face and how it had been submitted as evidence of domestic violence. He described 2 years of systematic harassment, inspections, complaints, zoning challenges, road access disputes, all timed to coincide with the tribal council's refusal of the easement. Then Ruth played the recording. Elena hadn't known about the recording. Ruth had obtained it that morning from a member of the tribal council's administrative staff. A voicemail from Gerald Torrance to the CEO of Redstone Development, left 4 months ago, in which Gerald said, and the courtroom heard, "I can have 3 families flagged for removal by end of month." That should give the council something to think about. Same terms as before, 5 per parcel. The courtroom went silent. Gerald stood up. His attorney pulled at his arm. Gerald shook him off. "You don't understand," Gerald said. "Those families, those homes, they weren't. The conditions were legitimate. I conducted preliminary assessments myself. The Red Hawk home had a 12-year-old unsupervised with blood on his face. That's grounds. That was a nosebleed, the judge said. From a child who'd been sleeping in a clean home with a parent undergoing cancer treatment at a facility 40 miles away. You photographed it. You submitted it as evidence of abuse, and you were paid to do so. Gerald's mouth opened, closed, opened again. I was protecting those children. You were selling them. The judge's voice was flat, final, bailiff. Gerald Torrance was arrested in the courtroom. He was escorted out in handcuffs, and as he passed Elena, he stopped and looked at her and said, "You have no idea what you've done." "I know exactly what I've done," Elena said. "I did my job. For the first time in 3 years, I did my actual job." The judge ruled, case dismissed. No removal. No further action against the Red Hawk family. A formal investigation was ordered into all CPS cases Gerald Torrance had supervised in the past 5 years, with particular attention to cases involving tribal families and land disputes. The 2 children from Elena's previous case were flagged for immediate review and potential reunification with their grandmother. Elena walked out of the courthouse and got in her car and drove back to the reservation. She drove the speed limit. She breathed. The sage grew thicker as she crossed the boundary, and by the time she pulled into the community center lot, the smell was so strong she could taste it. Asa was sitting on the porch. He was upright. He had color back in his face. He was wearing a blanket around his shoulders, and Manny was sitting next to him, and Daniel was on his other side, leaning against his arm. Elena got out of the car. She walked to the porch. She looked at the 3 of them, and her eyes burned, and she didn't wipe them. "It's done," she said. "He's arrested. The case is dismissed. The previous children are being reviewed for reunification." Daniel made a sound, small and choked, and buried his face against Asa's arm. Sandra appeared in the doorway and pressed her hand over her mouth. Asa looked at Elena. He held out his hand. She took it. She sat beside him on the porch. "I need to finish something," he said. "What?" "I love you. Full. Unbroken. No collapse. No interruption." 3 words spoken by a man who had learned to carry everything except the weight of saying them, and who was finally, deliberately, setting that burden down. "I love you, Elena. I loved you when you sat in that kitchen and promised a 12-year-old you wouldn't take him from his mother. I loved you when you filed that report over Gerald's head. I loved you on that cot in the dark. I love you now." She leaned into him. The sage was on both of them. The desert was wide and gold around them. "I love you too," she said. "And you're enrolling in that VA study tomorrow. Already enrolled. Manny did it while I was unconscious. Apparently that's a pattern now. People making medical decisions for me when I'm on the ground. Get used to it." Manny cleared his throat. "For the record, I also called his father's cousin in Tucson, who's a nurse, who's driving up tonight to monitor his vitals." "I didn't ask for that," Asa said. "And yet," Manny said, "it is happening." Daniel looked up. His eyes were red but steady. "Are you staying?" he asked Elena. "Here? With us?" Elena looked at the community center. The turquoise paint, the cracked court, the sage growing wild along the foundation. She looked at Asa, whose hand was warm in hers, whose scar was under her thumb, whose heart was audible in the quiet of the porch. "Yes," she said. "I'm staying." 6 months later, Gerald Torrance was convicted on 14 counts of fraud, corruption, and abuse of power. He was sentenced to 12 years. The Redstone Development Company was barred from all projects on tribal land. The 2 children from Elena's previous case were reunited with their grandmother in a ceremony that Elena attended, standing in the back row, unable to see through her tears. Sandra Redhawk finished her treatment. Her scans came back clear. She stood in her garden and watered her plants and watched her son do homework on the porch, and the wind chime made of shell and bones sang in the desert air. Asa enrolled in the VA burn pit study. The cyclical fevers were traced to particulate inhalation during his 2nd deployment. Treatment stabilized him within 3 months. He slept through the night. Every night. with Elena beside him on a bed they'd bought to replace the military cot, because some things deserve to be outgrown. Elena left CPS. She took a position with the Tribal Council's Family Services Division, building a child welfare framework from the inside, one that centered community and kinship and the kind of protection that doesn't come in a court order. She used everything she'd learned in the system to build something better outside of it. Daniel turned 13. He started helping Asa with the younger kids at the center. He learned to wrap hands for the heavy bag. He learned to read body language, to identify the kid in the corner who wasn't talking, to sit beside that kid and say nothing until the kid was ready. One afternoon, a new boy walked in, 10 years old, blood on his lip from a split that hadn't been treated, eyes flat, hands in fists. Daniel walked over. He didn't ask the boy's name. He didn't ask what happened. He sat down beside him on the bleachers and said, "You want some water?" The boy looked at him, then nodded. Daniel brought him water. Asa watched from the doorway. Elena stood beside him. The sage came through the open windows, the same sage, sharp and green and alive, the smell of the land doing what it had always done, holding its people together when everything else tried to pull them apart. Asa put his arm around Elena's shoulders. She leaned into him. The scar rested against her collarbone. The boy on the bleachers drank his water. The cycle continued, not of violence, not of removal, of reaching, of asking, of sitting beside someone in their worst moment and saying simply, without condition, "You want some water?" That's the story. A boy with blood on his face, a sick mother, a predator in a suit, a warrior who couldn't sleep, and a woman who walked onto that reservation with a court order and left it holding a life she didn't know was possible. The Apache didn't shock anyone with force. They shocked them with precision, with patience, with the quiet, devastating certainty that their children belonged to them, that their land belonged to them, that their future belonged to them, and that anyone who tried to take those things would find themselves standing in a courtroom listening to their own voice on a recording, learning what happens when you mistake quiet for weakness. Some legends start with war cries. This one started with a 12-year-old's sneakers on hot asphalt, a woman's hand on a car door, and the smell of wild sage crossing the boundary between one world and another. That's the kind of legend that lasts. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. We tell stories here that don't flinch. Next week, the one about the firefighter who found a baby in the wreckage, and the woman who came to claim it with a secret that changed everything. You're not going to want to miss it.